viewers, and welcome back. In this video I'm going to show you how to do a glowing eye effect. Keep in mind this is just going to be the most basic or simple way to do this, and I'm going to do it only using the colors you see in front of you. This isn't going to win you any Golden Demon Awards or anything. Again, I like to just get things done quick. I'm kind of impatient. I don't want to take 40 steps to do one thing because I don't want to spend all day on one model. So I want to be able to have a nice cool effect to add, and then I can move on and put it on whatever else I want it on. And again, I'm using the colors in front of you here, which again are Reaper paints. I have the Grass Green, Moth Green, Pure White, and the Flow Improver. Now, you don't have to use only Reaper paints or only these colors I'm going to show you to do this. The basic concept is you're just going to need a dark version of whatever color it is you want and a very light version, and then just the plain white, and you can even use water. You don't have to have a special flow improver. So for example, if I wanted to do blue instead of green, and maybe you're using Vallejo paints, you could do this same technique using this one, which is dark blue and sky blue. Again, you just want a dark variation of the color, in this case blue, and a very light variation, so you can see a little bit better on the bottom here. And the lighter one you want, I don't want to necessarily say white, but you want it closer to white, so it's very bright, but it's not, again, pure white. So again, I'm not using those, and you can use GW paints, whatever brand you want. Just keep in mind, you want a dark variation, a very light one, white, and some kind of media to make it thin, because in this technique that I'm going to show you, we're going to need to thin the paints down pretty good. And the piece that I'm going to be demonstrating on for you is going to be this Death Leaper head. I've already got it prepared and ready to go. The only thing I haven't done is just put highlights on the top carapace, and pretty much everything else is ready to go. This is one of the things you want to do as a last step after your model is pretty much finished, and you just want to go ahead and add this effect over it, because again, we're going to be using thin paints, and you don't really want to put anything over the top of it. If you're going to start messing around with other colors and you slop on top of it, you're going to ruin the effect. So again, you want to save this for last. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and reset up the camera, and I'm going to get started, and I'll just explain each one of the steps as I'm going through it. Alright, so I've got the camera set up so you can see a little bit better. I'll try my best to keep the head in the frame there, and I'll keep checking to make sure I don't go out of frame, just so you guys can actually see what I'm doing as I'm explaining it. Now, like I said, those colors that I showed you, the only ones that I'm using for this, the Grass Green has already been used prior to getting to this point. Again, the model needs to be in its final stages of preparation before you apply this technique. So all I've done is I've used that Grass Green before I washed it, and I filled in all the areas in the eyes only, inside the eye socket. Anything that kind of crept out onto the eyebrow, I touched up with the brown before I went ahead and washed it. And then again, now it's stuck in this point and ready to go to the next step. So I'm not going to be using this dark Grass Green anymore. And the next color I'm going to be using is the Moth Green, which is the really light and bright green variation. So again, just so you can see here. And again, what I need to do is I need to water this down. Now the reason for that goes along with the whole having the model caught up to this point. So you've got all your colors showing through, everything's ready to go. This lighting effect would be occurring after everything is obviously painted in the same form that it would be normally, and then the lighting effect just kind of casts over that. So you still want to be able to see some of that main color, being again why we need to thin these paints down. And again, it's going to let us see that color through it, but it's still going to show the effect of that green and give us that light feeling that it's actually coming out of there. So in order to water this down, what I'm going to do for my first step when I use this Moth Green is I'm going to use 1 drop out of the bottle and 2 drops of the Flow Improver, because again, I want it pretty thin, but I don't want it so thin that when I put it on here it runs all over and goes down into every crevice and gets away from me. So I want to be able to maintain some control over it but still get that transparency. So all I'm going to do is go ahead and mix that up with a 2-to-1 ratio, and then I'm going to start applying it on there, but again, I'm going to mix that up off camera. Now, if you're not using these Reaper paints in a dropper bottle, and maybe you're using the GW or Citadel paints that come out of the little pots, you're going to have to find some way to do it yourself, whether you use your brush to dip it out or some way to consistently get the same measurement. You can even use pipettes. That may help you get the whole dropper effect, so you can count out your drops and make sure you get a consistent amount every time. Or you can even just mix up a bigger batch until you get it to a similar consistency, and then it'll do the same effect regardless again of whichever brand or color of paints you're using. So for my very first step now, right out of the gate here over this Grass Green color that I've got on there, I've put a drop of my Moth Green in the palette, and I'm going to put it straight onto the eyeball. I don't want to cover the whole thing. I just want to leave most of the dark green around the edges there, but I'm going to cover up most of the center of the eyeball. So if I cover my hands up in the frame, I apologize, and I'll show you right away exactly what I've done, because I'm probably going to have to turn it just so I can look at it. Okay, so on the one eye I kind of ran into the eyebrow, so I had to kind of catch it up real quick. I just got a little bit of water on my brush and dabbed it out of there before it had a chance to dry. But as you can see, I've got the majority of the center top portion of the eye with that moth green just straight out of the bottle, not watered down. So it still has that dark grass green showing around it, and just kind of towards the surface of the eye is a lot brighter. So just touching it up a little bit, trying to make it a little bit more uniform and even. So again, I've got that first layer on there, and then the next step we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and mix 1 drop of the moth green to 2 drops of the flow improver. Alright, so in my palette I have mixed 1 drop of moth green with 2 drops of flow improver. Again, we want this paint thinned down because we want that transparent effect, because the whole point of this is that the light effect is coming from the eye, which again is why we have that little brighter bit of paint on the top there for now. And the thin paint going around the outside is going to be the effect of that light cascading out from the center and just shining on the skin. And again, we want it thinned down so we can get a little bit of that skin color showing from underneath, so it doesn't look like I just slopped a bunch of paint everywhere and did a really bad job painting my the eyes on my model. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the very edges of the eyes where, in the event that these things were actually lit up, where the light should be cast. Now you want to try and stay kind of within that, because if you get too far out it may look a little silly if you're putting it somewhere where maybe shadows might be, or if it's on the back side of something adjacent to the object that's supposedly casting this light effect that you're painting. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to try my best to stick around just the edges and just go out a little bit from the eyes there with that watered down paint. And when I do this, I try and have as little on my brush as possible, so as soon as I touch it doesn't run off onto the piece I'm trying to paint and get everywhere. Now, because again this paint is thinned down, it's going to try and seek out any kind of little crevices. So you can see right here under the bottom eye that some of it's starting to pool up where that little mouth mandible piece is showing up. Typically what I'll do is I'll just dab my brush off on a paper towel to suck off the paint, and then if I go ahead and stick my brush bristles in there, it'll kind of suck it up for me. So it'll pull it out of there while it's still wet. It won't really have a chance to set up and leave any color behind. So it just kind of pulls it out of there. And again, because you're working with watered down paint, it's going to do whatever it can to try and seek some recesses to fall into. So you may run into that. Again, just dab off your brush on a paper towel and then just kind of soak it up before it has a chance to set in. And then all we're going to do is we're just going to kind of keep repeating this as this paint dries, and we're going to keep going around and around and around the eyes until we have that level built up of the layer of paint so that it actually looks like light kind of shining out of the eyes there. Now if I was painting a little bit darker of a model, perhaps if it was black or something, this would show up a lot better. Because the skin on this is kind of light, sometimes it depends on how many layers you need to kind of make the effect show through a little bit better, or make it more visible or apparent in what you're trying to do. But we can still make it work. Just again, we're just going to have to build up those really thin layers. So even just this far in, you can still see a little bit of it starting to build up on the ridges there. Again, it's going to take a couple layers to really start to show through and get that effect. And again, this does take a little bit of time and a lot of patience. This is a very difficult technique to master, and I would not definitely consider myself a master of it yet. I've practiced for days trying to get this right, even before trying to just film it on camera and show you guys, just so I don't show you guys a bad way of doing this. And again, this is just the easiest that I've found that works for me. There's a lot of other techniques out there. There's a lot of different ways to do it. You can use an airbrush or dry brushing, but you're more likely going to use that on a larger scale. Doing something this small with these eyes is going to be really difficult to get any kind of precision out of either of those two methods. So this is kind of the one that you're reduced to at this point. And what I would recommend is most kits come with different head options for the most part of whatever army you have, and I would just kind of prime a couple of those and glue them onto a paper clip somewhere, you know, drill a little hole in them, glue them onto the end of a paper clip, and then prime them, and then just kind of start practicing and get your technique down before you actually go in and try and do it on a fully painted model and ruin all your hours of work that you may have put into trying to get it right, and then you make a bad paint stroke or something, or you forget to water it down enough and it kind of gets all over the place, and then you try and fix it and make it even worse and you got to start all over. So definitely something you want to practice many times on different things before you actually try and jump into doing it on a model. And then when you do, just kind of remember what you learned and do it that way, and just kind of stick with it. And once you get a couple models into it, it'll become a little bit easier, and it'll be a lot easier for you to get down, and you won't have as much to worry about moving on to the next one. So again, this layer is dry, so all I'm going to do is go ahead and get a little bit more on my brush, and I'm going to keep putting those thin layers on here. And if you'll notice, I'm also putting a little bit of paint over here on this piece of mandible, just because it's in such close proximity to the eye that if this eye was actually casting light out of it, it would be landing on that area. So I'm just stroking a little bit of paint right on the edge here, just so that it would kind of give that effect of light glowing on it. So you can see the glow effect is starting to kind of make itself apparent. We still want to maybe put at least another layer or two on here just to kind of really make it pop, and then we're going to go ahead and lighten that color up to kind of make it really shine, so we can get those hard detail edges in there, kind of enforcing the fact that there's something really bright glowing there casting this light effect, and it's not all just kind of the same color hanging out in one spot that necessarily didn't get colored inside the lines. Alright, so we've got a pretty good build up there. The lighting effect, as you can see, it's kind of showing through. We can still tell that there's some brown skin color there, but the green's starting to build up on it. Again, just giving us that effect that there's green light emanating from whatever object it is, and in this case it would be the eyeballs. So it's not a perfect job all the way around. The paint, again, does tend to get away from you a little bit. It's pretty hard to paint across the top of that center ridge between all three eyeballs just because it's so thin. The water wants to run down in there. So I just keep having to use my brush to kind of drag it out so that I have a little bit of that dark outline around the outside of each one of those eyeballs with that grass green color. Again, I don't want the whole thing that color, but it is kind of deeper down inside the eyeball, so we want a little bit of an effect that there's some sort of shadow or that there's a deep recess there, that the light's not in there and it's coming from the actual eyeball itself towards the highest point. So I'm just going to put one last little bit to go around with the watered down moth green, and then we're going to change the colors up a little bit and go ahead and apply our more bright highlights to this effect. Alright, so at this point we have enough layers on there that it's built up. Again, you can tell there's kind of a little bit of a thin light glow effect towards the farther reaches of the eye. So if you look at light and the way it affects objects, and the best way that I can describe this to you is if you look at a Christmas light, just a single little bulb in the strand there, and you look at the way the color is, if you look at it towards the very center, it's actually white, and then as it gets farther from that center, it starts to get a little bit darker, and you get a little bit deeper tones in whatever color that bulb is of the light. Now, we want that same effect in this, so again, we've only used the same color up to this point, built up that thin layer, so now we need to kind of get towards the center of that light, where it's white, or its brightest point that's cascading and sending out that light. Now, when I do this, I don't typically use white by itself, because then it just kind of, I can't really get it to blend and mix in well. Okay, so now in order to come close to making that white center of the light, again without using just plain white, what I've done is I've mixed 1 drop of moth green with 1 drop of pure white. That way it lightens up that moth green color a little bit without going too overboard and making it way too bright, because if you're going to shade all the way down to plain white, you have to do a lot of layers in order to get there. And again, I'm only just doing a couple steps here, just trying to make this look nice. Again, no Golden Demon quality product here. It's still going to add a nice little effect to your models when they're on the table. So again, what I'm going to do, just like I did putting the moth green over the grass green on the eyeballs, I'm going to try and make an even smaller dot on there than I did, and just kind of go towards the very top and just fill inside of that moth green that's on the eyeball itself. And again, this is just 1 drop of moth green, 1 drop of pure white, and there is no flow improver mixed in this. Because I'm putting it on top of the eyeball, I want it to stay there, so I want it to be in a thicker form, so that when I touch it on there, it doesn't run down and kind of fill in the whole eyeball and ruin the effect for me. So again, that's just a thickest form that I can get these two colors mixed together, and I'm gonna try and get them to stay just on top of the eyeball there. So forgive me if I go out of the frame for just a second. Okay, so as you can see, it's a lot brighter just on the top there. It's kind of filled into that moth green, and then we still have the grass green ring showing around where a little bit of the watered down mixtures run into it, so that's kind of helped us blend it and thinned it down just a little bit, but still maintains that dark color down inside the recesses of the eyes. And then the only other thing that I'm going to do with this is hit up some of the harder edges that are closer to the top of the eyeball. So things like this little mandible piece here, I'm going to just put a little dab on there and just kind of try and still maintain a little bit of realism here, but again, we're just kind of using the minimal standard here just to get it to look like it's a lighting effect. So we didn't cover up all the watered down paint towards the outside. I just stayed towards the hard edges again, just around the rim of the eye, a little bit onto the black carapace piece at the top of the head, and some on the mandible there towards the front of the jaw. So as you can see, it's just a real quick, easy effect. It's not, again, too terribly difficult. It just takes a little bit of practice to kind of get it to look just like you want it. Again, this would look a lot better on a darker model, so it is a little bit harder to show up on something this light. I didn't really have anything else that I could demonstrate this technique on that wasn't a piece of junk or, you know, like a piece of a sprue. So hopefully you guys found this technique useful. If you guys have any questions or didn't quite understand any part of what I did here, please feel free to ask, leave a comment below. I'll be glad to go over it again with you. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put this in fast motion as I do the other side and try and catch it up so that it looks like the same side that I did for you on camera. So thanks for watching again. Hope you guys found this useful. Thanks for all the likes, subscribers, comments, positive feedback. If you guys want to see anything, please let me know, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks. you.